I set the salad down and started to sit. My mother-in-law sneered, "The help doesn't eat with family." I looked her dead in the eye and said, "Good to know." Because I carefully set the salad bowl on the table, easing it down as the silver tongs caught the light, shining against the crisp green lettuce and bright red tomatoes. My fingers shook just a little, but I covered it up by straightening the tablecloth, smoothing out an invisible wrinkle like everything was perfectly fine. The long mahogany table looked like something out of a magazine, laid out with fine china, polished glasses, and tall candles whose flames flickered like they were silently passing judgment on everyone seated there. I started to lower myself into the empty chair beside my husband when a sharp, cold voice sliced through the room. "The help doesn't eat with family." Time seemed to stop. Forks hovered midair. Smiles stiffened and fell apart all at once. My mother-in-law, Margaret Whitmore, delivered the line with her chin held high, her lips curled in a sneer. The diamonds around her neck flashed under the chandelier, sparkling like she was wearing a crown made of pure cruelty. Her eyes locked onto mine, daring me to back down, daring me to remember the invisible chains she thought still held me in place. But this time was different. This time, I didn't look away. I didn't choke down the humiliation like I had so many times before. I met her stare head-on, keeping my voice steady even though it burned with something fierce underneath. "Well, that's good to know," I said calmly, letting a small smile tug at my lips, "because the help owns this resort." The silence that followed hit harder than thunder ever could. A wave of gasps moved around the table. Glasses clinked as hands shook. My husband's face drained of color, and Margaret's sneer crumbled, shifting from confusion to disbelief, and then, finally, to fear. In that moment, I savored the payoff of a plan I'd been quietly preparing for years. You see, I wasn't always the owner of this resort. There was a time when I really was just the help. When I first met Daniel, my husband, I was working as a waitress in a small cafe near the university he attended. I was taking classes part-time, scraping together tuition money, bouncing between cafe shifts and cleaning houses just to stay afloat. I didn't come from money. I didn't have a famous last name, a trust fund, or the polished connections Margaret worshipped. All I had was determination, ambition, and a quiet fire inside me that refused to go out. Daniel fell for me. At least, I believed he did. He was charming and attentive, and for a while, he made me feel like his equal. Love blinded me back then. Margaret, on the other hand, saw everything clearly, or at least she thought she did. From the start, she decided I wasn't good enough for her son. The first time we met, she shook my hand like she was afraid she might catch something. Later, thinking I was out of earshot, she dismissed me with a single sentence. "A waitress is hardly suitable for a Whitmore." That was the day Margaret declared war. From then on, nothing about me escaped her cruelty. She criticized my clothes, my upbringing, even how I held my wine glass. At family dinners, she made sure I served instead of sat. She whispered doubts into Daniel's ear, slowly convincing him that marrying me had been a mistake. Still, I didn't leave. Not because I was weak, but because leaving would have handed her exactly what she wanted. So I stayed. I endured. I smiled through gritted teeth while her behavior grew sharper and more calculated. And all the while, I was planning. What Margaret never realized was that behind my quiet expressions, I was building something she'd never be able to tear down. It started as a dream, one I clung to on the darkest nights, when her insults cut the deepest. I wanted to create a place where people like me, people who'd been overlooked, dismissed, and underestimated, could finally feel valued. I began small, launching a catering business with money I scraped together from extra shifts. I did everything myself. I cooked the meals, delivered them, washed the dishes, and handled the paperwork late into the night. Bit by bit, the business grew. People started noticing. Soon I was catering weddings, corporate events, and private parties. At first, the money came in slowly, then faster, until it finally started to flow. Margaret never noticed any of it. Why would she? To her, I didn't exist unless she needed someone to belittle. Daniel noticed at first. He praised my effort, told me he was proud. But that pride didn't last. Before long, admiration turned into jealousy. He didn't like that I worked late or came home tired but satisfied. He wanted me small, dependent, something pretty to show off at his mother's gatherings. That's when the cracks in our marriage really started to show. He resented my drive. I resented his lack of one. And Margaret made sure to keep stirring the pot, feeding him lies about how I was only after his family's money. If only she'd known the truth. By the time Daniel was drowning in debt from careless investments, I had already bought my first property, a modest beachfront place just outside town. He never asked how I paid for it. He didn't care. To him, my income was pocket change, barely worth mentioning in the grand Whitmore universe. But that was only the beginning. Within 3 years, I bought another property. Then another. Each one bigger, better, and more profitable than the last. I studied constantly, worked quietly, and closed deals without drawing attention. While Margaret and Daniel continued to see me as the help, I was building an empire right under their noses. The irony was sweet. Still, revenge isn't just about success. It's about timing. So when Margaret insisted the annual Whitmore family reunion be held somewhere respectable enough for our name, I casually made a suggestion. "There's a new resort opening," I said lightly. "I could help set things up." Margaret smirked, clearly pleased at the thought of putting me to work. "Yes, dear. Do make yourself useful." She never asked for the resort's name. Never asked who owned it. She assumed, like she always did. And that assumption was about to cost her everything. The days leading up to the reunion were chaos inside my head. Part of me still hoped Daniel would defend me, that he'd stand by my side the way he once had. But he was already too tangled up in his mother's control. The man I married was gone, replaced by a colder version shaped by her cruelty. On the morning of the reunion, he snapped at me. "Don't embarrass us today, Megan," he said. "This is important." Embarrass us. It was like my very presence offended him. I smiled anyway and leaned in to kiss his cheek. "Of course, darling." What he didn't know was that the stage was already set, for his mother's humiliation and for his own reckoning. The moment the family arrived at the resort, Margaret was dazzled. She swept through the grand lobby, taking it all in before finally announcing, loud and proud, "Now this is a place that meets Whitmore standards." She had no idea she was complimenting something I built with my own 2 hands. All day long, I stayed in the background, moving quietly, making sure every guest was comfortable and every detail was perfect. I watched closely as my staff, performed flawlessly. Everything was running exactly as I planned. But Margaret couldn't help herself. That evening, at dinner, when I went to take a seat, she struck again. The help doesn't eat with family. The timing couldn't have been better. The setting was perfect. The line landed exactly where it needed to. "Good to know," I replied evenly, "because the help owns this resort." The words exploded through the room. Chairs screeched against the floor. Voices erupted into shocked murmurs. Margaret's face drained of color in seconds. "What nonsense is this?" she snapped, though her voice trembled. I stood slowly, letting the silence stretch and weigh on her. "This resort," I said clearly, "along with 5 others in this state, 3 overseas, and 2 more currently under construction, all belong to me." Gasps rippled through the room. "Every glass of wine you've enjoyed, every dish you've eaten, every luxury you've praised tonight, it's all mine." My husband stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like he couldn't catch his breath. I stepped closer to Margaret and kept going. "And you," I said calmly, "have spent years treating me like I was nothing. You mocked me, belittled me, humiliated me, while I built an empire right under your nose." Margaret tried to laugh, but the sound broke apart halfway through. "You expect us to believe this?" "Check the ownership records," I cut in sharply. "Whitmore Holdings may be drowning in debt, and your family name won't save you now. This empire is mine. And tonight, you're my guests." Her hand shook as she reached for her wine glass. Daniel looked at me like he was seeing a stranger. There was no love in his eyes, only fear. "Megan," he whispered. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you were never on my side," I replied coldly. "You chose her. Every time." The room was thick with shock, but inside, I felt light. Free. Powerful. For the first time in her life, Margaret had nothing to say. In the days that followed, the Whitmore family's fall came fast. Their debts were exposed. Their businesses collapsed. Their influence disappeared overnight. The same people who once looked down on me were now scrambling under the harsh spotlight of public scandal. Daniel tried to make things right, but I wouldn't hear it. You only loved me when you thought I was beneath you, I told him. You don't get to love me now. Margaret avoided me after that. Her pride was shattered beyond repair. She never spoke about that night and never met my eyes again. Her silence was the sweetest revenge of all. As for me, I flourished. My resorts thrived. My name carried weight. And my life was no longer shaped by their cruelty or approval. Still, sometimes late at night, I think back to that moment at the table, the fear in Margaret's eyes, the gasp that escaped Daniel's lips, the silence that swallowed the room whole. It was never just about revenge. It was about taking myself back. About proving that no matter how deeply they tried to bury me, I would rise. And rise I did. Because the help doesn't just serve the table. Sometimes, the help owns it. The end.